This is an overview of our 1980 911 SC Targa. She's headed to Boston. For those that are familiar with the videos which we do, you might notice a slightly different change in environment. We're in fact shooting this from our showroom slash storeroom that we have for clients to come through and have a look at the cars that we built. So we will in fact be spending a little bit of time talking about those cars, in fact purely to position this particular model in terms of where it's come from, in terms of the lineage of this company. And what I am kind of using that rather as a kind of a structure, a narrative structure, to give you a view as to where I believe the Porsche market is going. So we'll come right back to this car, but first let's take a little walk down memory lane, as it were, and it's all for the purposes of being able to explain why that 911 SC Targa is so special. But let's start over here, which is in fact the very first car which we built, and this would have been back in, well, she was launched in 2013, so she's now 11 years old since she was built by us. So we started building her roughly, I don't know, well, quite some time before that. But this is a car which we effectively built first, and then I'm going to take you through one or two kind of key, let's call them milestones, that as a business we've reached, not so much to kind of talk about these cars per se, but to give you a very clear idea as to how and why we've refined what we're doing, and why it is that we're zeroing in on a very specific, let's call it, kind of role that we like to play in this industry. And all of that, with any luck, if all goes according to plan, will then kind of result in why that little car over there is so special. Okay, so without any further ado, let's talk about this car. She's a 68 912. So for those that are not familiar with the car, four-cylinder motor in the back, originally at least, known as the poor man's Porsche, but everything other than that, to be honest. Very popular in rallying kind of terms, especially in their day. And this car was our first car, and it has a very important role to play in terms of how we approach our builds. When I first built this car, I wanted to, and this was 13, 14 years ago, in fact 15 years ago when we in fact started thinking about how best to do what we were going to do. The thinking behind Dutchmann at the time was one of always kind of celebrating the nature of the underlying model that we were working on. And in this case, the 912 or the 912, depending in which country you're based, the underlying concept or story to us was the fact that in the kind of mid to late 60s, you were able to walk into a Porsche dealership and you could order a 912 with its four-cylinder motor with a rally spec. And they could, amongst other things, put in a dead pedal rest and bigger brakes and possibly even a roll bar. They would upgrade a few things for you, and then you'd literally, as a privateer, go rallying. And the 912s or the 912s were incredibly capable in those days as rally cars because they had such amazing balance. Light motors in the back, light overall, and for rallying purposes, they did extremely well. To the extent that, in fact, you had a few privateer rally enthusiasts, as in amateurs, as it were, that beat the professionals, and there's some lovely stories about that. So when we built our first car, the underlying approach that we took was one of always celebrate the kind of the nature or the kind of the heritage of the model that we're working with. And in this case, the concept which actually led to where Dutchmann went to was, let's go and put ourselves back in 1968, except instead of being able to walk into the dealership and purely choose from what they had available at the time as to how we could upgrade the car, let's upgrade the car using a far broader set of options that the broader 911 range now offers. So what if in 1968 you could walk in and actually select a really high revving 911 motor that kind of came out in the later 70s? So let's put a 2.7 litre in the back, but let's take it up to 2.9 litres with a lot more compression. Let's put in downdraft carburation that's a lot more efficient. Let's upgrade the brakes, which we did in this car, to much later, kind of Carrera, well, 4 pots sitting inside there. Let's not only do that, let's take a bit of weight out of the car. Let's put in bucket seats, or not bucket seats rather, but these are the tombstone seats that you would only see coming through in 1974. And the whole thought behind this car when we built it was we take the concept that Porsche was employing at the time anyway, except we march it forward in time. And in whatever, the 20 would have been then, it would have been 2012, 2013, what would you select then to create this amazing rally car? And that's what we did. And then we went off and raced it in the desert. And that set in motion something which we didn't anticipate, in fact, turning into a business. If anything, the car was meant to be a one-off, and we were meant to kind of maybe build one or two others, but suddenly the press got hold of it and we were inundated with orders. But what I want to underscore is that what we did with this car is fundamentally 14 years later what we're doing with that car. But we're doing a lot more, but at the same time, a lot less. And just for those that are able to kind of maybe pick up the text, you'll perhaps read, if you're lucky, kind of this whole concept of less is more is something which we're digging down into. So what is the concept that I'm referring to? The creative license that we took with this car is something which served us incredibly well at the time. Some people love this look, some people hate the look. I personally absolutely love this look, especially on a very narrow-bodied car. But in today's terms, given where these cars are going, how much you change needs to be very, very carefully considered. And the term resto mod broadly is something which needs to be considered very, very carefully, especially given the underlying value of these assets, which I'll talk about generally as we go through the day. Well, through the talk. It's not going to be that long. In any event, so here is the first incarnation of a Dutchman. It's a 912 with a 911 motor. It's the best of all the parts which we believe could go into a lightweight kind of car that would be great on the dust roads or in the desert, which is where we took it and raced it. And out of that came a fairly unique aesthetic so that we could get it somewhat recognizable. And from that, our order book opened. And from that, we built many, many cars. But what we always would do is we would celebrate the very underlying nature of the model that we were working with. We do not backdate. We backdated once, and I did it very early on. We'll never do it again. The concept, I think at the time, was very compelling. Now, obviously, it's quite popular. Our view is that it's very much on the decline and would not be the best financial investment, in our opinion. So, what came next? Well, a number of cars came next, but this is an interesting example of a car which falls somewhat into a different category of cars that we build. This is our current kind of works racing car, if you want to call it that. Very, very capable car. It was always a race car before we even got it or bought it as a donor. And we effectively bought it from a racer who'd raced it very hard for at least 20 years before we got to it. We simply built it back up again to the best that it could be. But it is a high performance car. So let's talk about what we changed on this car. Very little, in fact, did we change, but it serves as a very good distinction between let's call it a conceptually driven car, where you're building a car that's not trying to be too fast, it's still very comfortable, it's got kind of leather seats and it's like super rudimentary 912 dash and so on. But if we want to win races, what do we do then? Then what we do is we get carbon boot lid or deck lid. Carbon, bumpers, front and rear, carbon hood at the front, take the weight out. What we then do is we put into these cars, what these are our carbon racing seats, which are made out of carbon and Kevlar, very lightweight, very stiff, great for racing. They connect you to the car, so not only can you feel the car, you're obviously kept safer as well, but the feel that the car gives you is important. We've got an upgraded gear shifter in there, which gets us back to neutral without struggling. There's one or two, slightly smaller steering wheel that gives you slightly tighter turn when you need it. And aesthetically, somewhat restrained. But this car was built to win races. It is not a car that you'd want to drive every day, unless you want to snap your head back constantly, which can be fun, but a little bit tiring. But it is a car where let's say, the license that we've taken there is we will set aside a degree of comfort, and only a degree, for the sake of winning races. And for anybody that does race properly, you'll understand that when it comes to winning races, you'll give up any degree of comfort to win races. This car did remarkably well in terms of gaining a balance of comfort as well as performance. It wins in class up hills, hill climbs and so on. And we can be driven for 1,600 kilometers, 3,000 kilometers, which we've done. But it is ultimately a car which we built where its primary objective was one of high performance. So if somebody comes to us and says, I want a high performance car, we will work within the realms of what high performance means to them. And so, for example, whilst we might be building some very high performance later cars like 964s, this was a classic example of a classic car built for high performance for what we needed it for. And we built a number of cars for clients where that is the core objective. But it is fundamentally different to the objective which we followed for this car, which was conceptually, that's where the 912 came from. Let's celebrate that, make as if we traveled in time and produced another 912 for the purposes of rallying. What would it be? And we took a little bit of creative license in terms of its wheels, but aesthetically we pared it back. This guy, it wins races. Now, what Dutchmann's doing rapidly, and not rapidly rather, what Dutchmann has done gradually, in fact is the term I'm looking for. Over the year, we're up to 42, 43 odd cars. Over the cars that we've built, we've slowly but surely pared things back. Okay, so we're doing less, but the things that we're doing less of are very considered. And in fact, the concept of less is more is if you focus in on the small changes that have the significant impact, that's where we actually want to kind of end up building cars. So here is a good example of that. Now this is a 964. She's a 1989. This car is fundamentally OEM and stock, okay, except the changes that we've made, and by the way, her classic or kind of original Cup 1 wheels, we swap in and out depending on, whether we'd like to or not. We have the option of that, which is great. But if she was sitting on her standard 964 Cup 1s, this car would look fundamentally just like a standard 964, except she's got a slightly unique color to her. But this is a very good example of the next degree up that we've taken, where a car gets, the donor itself is very much unchanged, but is rebuilt to be absolutely perfect. So this is a 964, and we've undertaken, fundamentally, technically speaking, only 3 very small changes. The first thing is it's the fully rebuilt but original power plant. Okay, so the 3.6 liter motor, wonderful motors. They've already got high compression. They've got twin spark. They're very, very capable motors. Pushing more out of them doesn't necessarily make them better, in our opinion, depending on what better means for you, which we'll get to at the end. But stock standard but rebuilt motor, stock standard G50 gearbox. But what we've done is we've put a lightweight RS spec flywheel and clutch into the car. And the reason we've done that is that she's the first year model, so she's an 89, which means she's a Carrera 4. She's got all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, as it were, which I really must say, for those that pan a 911 that's got four-wheel drive, specifically in the classics, please drive one aggressively and let's have a chat again. Because the Carrera 4 is a remarkable vehicle. But because of the slightly extra weight that it carries, because it's driving power through to the front from the rear, there's obviously there's a degree of mechanics that makes that happen. She's a little bit heavier than a Carrera 2, and sometimes can feel a little bit sluggish. And even the wheel feels a little bit heavier because there's traction coming from the front. So to counterbalance that, what we do is we put in a lightweight flywheel and clutch, which is an RS spec component. She gains revs faster. She also loses those revs faster. She kind of delivers quite a perky drive. And to that, we match the short shift little shifter. So this car, the original wheel, by the way, goes back on when we put on the original wheels. But this car drives like a Carrera 2, but has all the benefits of a Carrera 4, and then has a unique color scheme. This one happens to be Porsche Racing Green, PRG, British Racing Green to anybody that knows the distinction between those. They're the same color. Porsche just refused to call it British Racing Green. So this is an example then of a car to which we've done extremely small amounts of change. But what we've brought to that car is a fundamental change in how it behaves. In our opinion, it's improved it remarkably. We haven't messed with a really good thing. We haven't messed with trying to take too much weight out. There is no real benefit in that. We've just given her a slightly perkier drive by way of some kind of changes to the broader transmission and by way of gearing. And then other than that, she currently just aesthetically has Fuchs wheels on her, but very importantly, she has a unique color scheme. The 964 was never available in a flat, non-metallic Porsche Racing Green. It brings to her quite a lovely look. For those that are quite familiar with what the changes are between the early and later models, she also has a slightly later teardrop side view mirror, and obviously the originals are still kept. So there is an example, and the 964s separate video, we've covered this in much detail. The 964s have become, in my opinion, so pretty. Of course, they haven't changed. What's happened is our, let's call it, perceptions of them have changed. Where they, the market thought up to 4 or 5 years ago that they were the ugly duckling. Meanwhile, they are in their own right beautiful. And of course, there are now very few of them left. And the resto mod industry broadly has kind of stripped them out because they're such good cars, which have then been, by many people, kind of butchered to look like that. Now, making a car which was designed in its own right, extremely successful in its own right, to look like something else, fundamentally different, is where we very much draw the line. We will not backdate a car to look from this to that. This is then a car which celebrates what it is aesthetically, in terms of not changing what it looks like, but just making a few key changes to it. And sure, we've taken 1 or 2 other small liberties where she's got this, wonderful kind of leather to her. It's our signature leather. But other than that, no real change. So would you call this a resto mod? And it's a term which I had a discussion just the other day, the journalist, wonderful discussion. And he said, well, I guess you're a resto mod, but you're slightly different. And the thing I always try and stress is, I guess we do restore, and we do to some extent modify. But the extent of modification, whilst that was, I wouldn't say great in relative terms to what some people are doing, we're trying to, let's call it, dial down how much modification we do and spend more and more time making these cars simply better and better and better within an existing set of constraints or criteria that Porsche had in place in the first place. This is a car that aesthetically looks fundamentally the way that she looked when she came off the showroom floor. She just drives better. And we simply put components into her that Porsche were making even at the time. And then we took a few aesthetic decisions to make her unique to what we were building. So is that a resto mod? I don't like that term at all. It's not a resto mod. It is, because I can't argue the term itself. But it's an incredibly considered, let's call it, modification. And if I was to, before we get on to where we're going with the Boston Targa, this to me is a great milestone in the development of this company. We built this car around 5-6 years ago. She's our show car. Anybody that wants to fly through and kind of take a drive in here is welcome to do that. But this is a great milestone in how our views started to change around stop trying to kind of make an obvious statement about being somewhat unique, rather say less, but achieve a lot more. And the next question is, how much further can you take that? So let's use an extreme of not taking it anywhere at all before we get to where we're building cars at the moment. This here is, in fact, it's my personal car. This is a stock, standard, 1981 911 SC, coupe, as you'd call it. This car is 100% rebuilt to Concours standard. I can show you every nut and bolt, but she's not the dame of the ball today, so we're not going to spend too much time on her. But this is an example of a 100%, one, it was a very good donor car, but the original color on this car, the original specification, the original obviously matching numbers, motor and so on, but everything totally rebuilt to be 100% perfect. This is simply not simply, but it is a restoration. It is a very high level restoration. So, it is beautifully done. I guess it's leather, whereas before, and leather was an option. It's got everything as it should be. And it is remarkable, and it is a valuable asset. It's a tradable icon around the world. And, I think it serves as a great example of how an SC or a G series broadly is just so kind of coming back into the world of everybody wants them. It drives wonderfully, it drives reliably. It is a perfectly restored, as though she just left the showroom floor, 911 SC. But here's the interesting thing about this little car, which is she's not particularly unique. She is as she was the day she came out of the factory. And whilst that process of getting her to that level is expensive, and obviously, anybody who we build it for would be part of that process, and there's a certain value to building a car back to 100% original spec, she's not your own. She's not your special car. And here, this is a very contentious issue. The number of times I see people building resto mods broadly, and they throw in an open checkbook and build the car of their dreams with purple stitching and ghost stripes and performance statistics rather, that are eye-watering. Those cars never sell. They sit on auctions and they lose eye-watering amounts of money because they've been made somewhat too unique. I'm not saying that every car that one builds needs to be unique, but if you're going to go through a process of waiting for roughly a year and then having to build a car for a year and spending quite a lot of money, do you simply want a 100% original 911, or do you want something that is your own? And that's where we're focused. We do restore. I restore mostly for myself, to add to a collection that I think is just ultimately a very kind of safe and growing kind of place to put one's funds if you have the opportunity to be able to get hold of these vehicles. But our business does not lie in purely restoration to a concours standard. It sits in creating you something unique. And by the way, this is just an older version of this debate. I've owned this car now for over 20 years. We restored it to absolutely perfect, pristine condition. The look of that car is beautifully pared down. But again, as beautiful as this vehicle is, if you just look at those proportions, it's wonderful. But as beautiful as she is a car that would have been available at the time, and there are a few of them, quite a number of them floating around. Where is the car that Dutchmann builds, and what is that? Here she is. Now this is a vehicle that's going off to Boston in the United States. She is, well, amongst a number of kind of things, there's a few things that are quite special about it. So let's start at the very top and then work backwards. So first thing is, these cars are all and have been restored a number of years ago. They look in obviously fantastic condition. They get very well looked after, and I drive them hard. This car is a perfect example of the level to which we are building cars and what makes them unique. So let's do a quick overview, shall we? What is she? Okay, so 1980 911 SC Targa, left-hand drive. Porsche pushed this car out and obviously did very well at the time. The 911 SC is pretty much credited with saving the Porsche brand. It's a bit dramatic, but they definitely set in course, the SCs did, kind of the amazing balance that Porsche was striking. A high-performance car that was very reliable, sufficiently high performance to certainly kind of get you to the point where you couldn't afford the fine you'd have to pay should you get caught speeding. Comfortable, practical, and unique in terms of a lot of bits and pieces that came in with it. The 911, the G series, which came in 74, carried the bumpers for the new legislation. I've got many videos that cover that. But ultimately, you're looking at the vehicle, in Targa shape at least, that kind of serves as the backbone of, let's call it the 911 generation that we're still sitting part of. Initially, this car came off the factory floor as white, and she had the black pack. So from late 79, you could no longer get chrome trim, you could only get black trim, and that applied as well to the wheels, in fact from slightly earlier. And off the showroom floor came that car. Now we could offer the service of being able to reproduce this car to that very same spec that she left the showroom floor. And we would do it at a level that would be extremely high. But that wouldn't in any way give you something, let's say, that you couldn't necessarily get from a number of other interesting places that restore cars. So what is it that makes this car unique? Let's talk aesthetics, and then we'll talk performance. So the first obvious thing is, what color is she? Well, she's a unique color. I spent a long time with the owner going through a lot of options around what color we thought would work best on a 911 Targa. We'll talk about the hood in a second. But what you may or may not be able to see in this light is that is not black. That is a color which has been custom mixed and has a lot of, let's call it, degrees of tonal warmth in it. That is black. There's black, and as wonderful as black is, as soon as you take black and you put black onto or around the likes of this trim, it disappears, black on black, whereas this trim doesn't disappear. You can still see the trim. The light isn't possibly as perfect as it should be, but we wanted a car that would almost appear black, or that would appear black in certain light, but wouldn't be black, so that we wouldn't lose the great detail of trim that you get in the G series, all of which was black. So a custom color. we'll call it Gabriel Black, shall we? A custom color. The next thing she's got is a hood that is also from the Porsche stable. This is a 356 fabric. So we have a wonderful supplier out in Germany. Let's see how close we can get in. Who supplies us with our hood fabrics. And that is in fact a hood fabric that comes out of an early 356. There's an amount left which they still have in storage, which we keep. So what we've got here is a very unusual or a unique combination of a light hood and a dark body with silver chrome trim. And if there's one thing that this car does, is it whispers versus shouts, kind of its elegance. And it's something which I think is just such a fine line to tread, and it's so difficult to get right, where this car is extremely simple in what it initially kind of presents itself as being. It's understated. It's not bright and flashy. In fact, it's exactly the reverse. But it's got these little bits of detail that kind of talk of an interesting story around kind of where Porsche's come from. And obviously there's now this very unique aesthetic that the car presents. So as a whole, and I'll get into more details as we go, the aesthetics of this car were extremely kind of well considered. We wanted a color that was sufficiently unique. You can start to see some of the hues coming through there. So a color that was sufficiently unique. That's a great view. There we go. That's black, and this here is Gabriel Black. But this is a car which kind of just takes tiny little dials back from black to a unique color, and then just zooms in on the detail. So everything now is about 100% detail. The Targa loom has been kind of brought back to its original stainless steel finish, and everything else on this car is 100% new. 100% new. So let's talk about that very generally. It's quite difficult to, terrible light, let's go back this way. When I say new, well, let's have a look here. Everything on this car is OEM, and everything is new. Let's see how much further we can go here. So that is just one of 10,000 parts that this car comprises. And every single one of those parts, every single one of them is perfect and is new. Obviously, within reason, there are certain components which are no longer replaceable, and when they're not replaceable, they get refurbished, the likes of the inside of this Targa hood. Every rubber seal, as it were, 100% OEM. Everything is the way that it was or would have been the day that it left the factory floor. Except we're now sitting, 40 odd years outside of the day that she left the factory floor. So what is it that this car ultimately is? So let's just take that a little bit further. All right, here we are inside the engine bay. Everything is new. Everything is perfect. Everything is the day that she was, the second that she left. In fact, I'd argue in certain cases slightly better, the day that she left the factory floor. Just two more points I want to cover. One of them is around the concept of performance per se. And then secondly, I want to talk about a little special component that this car's got. In fact, let's talk about this first. In this, it's a Mylar hood. It's a clear hood. It's produced by a company in Germany, which we work with, or we source them from. And I was initially very kind of concerned about what this hood would look like, because I must say I really quite like the contrast, or we quite like the contrast between, let's call it something relatively new looking and then something that's got a lot of texture to it. So I was always very concerned about us putting on a clear hood. The clear hood obviously turns this car from a Targa into fundamentally a coupe or a coupe. She gets all the benefits of being a coupe. She's fully sealed. I would think to some extent maybe a little bit warmer. The feel that she gets and the light that she gets through the hood is amazing. But I was a little bit concerned it might be a little bit too flashy. Because now what happens is we've taken this car and we've kind of doubled down on making her this understated, elegant beauty. And now we're putting like a contemporary hood on her. But it works particularly well in this case. And I think it can work very well in the later Targas from the G series up. The further you go back, we just got to be careful that we get that balance right. But she's got something special then, which is this little clear hood. There's just one more thing that I want to cover. And that comes down to the concept of, which I find quite interesting and entertaining. being in the industry, is this concept of speed, and how it is that speed is seen as this kind of very simplistic barometer of better and, good, better, and best. Like the faster a car is, the better it is. And it's a little bit like playing trump cards. You put down your card and you beat the guy next to you because you've got a slightly higher top speed, acceleration for that matter. And there's no doubt that how one drives a car and the enjoyment you get from a car certainly is influenced by its performance. But when one dumbs down the relative, let's call it value, or enjoyment you can get from a car, or how good a car is in inverted commas, when you purely look at speed, it's at that point that I start to laugh. And we build cars that are fast. We can build cars that are very fast and will win races. It doesn't mean that they are in any way better cars. The car that you enjoy the most is the car that, in fact, you drive the most. And what is the car that you drive the most? The car that you drive the most is the car that makes you feel good. In other words, you feel comfortable in the car in terms of a degree of comfort. It is reliable. You don't have that angst about not being able to get where you want to go or back from where you want to go. It's got a good feel to it. In other words, it goes where you want it to go as fast as you want it to go. It's iconic in as much as, I wouldn't say, well, iconic might be a bit of a strong word, but it says something about who you are. So there's a design aesthetic to that vehicle, which, let's say, represents your view of what you think is, because cars obviously have there's one effect, which is they're like badges which people are able to wear. A car says a lot about you. And if you enjoy an understated aesthetic or a specific aesthetic and that car represents that for you, that's important to you. So you feel good in a car. If you feel good in that car, you drive that car. And those factors are multiple. Many, many factors make up what makes a good car for you. And it's not just speed. And it's not just aesthetics. And it's not just value. And it's not just, how many stripes you can put on it. It's all of those things that come together. And if I was to now finish off where we started, that's the thing that we're focusing in on, which is we don't build pure restorations and we don't modify, and that's what we're known for. And we don't try and build you the fastest car only that'll win you the race, or something unique that's somewhat mixed between old and new. What we try and do, or not what we aim to do, and I believe we've to a great extent achieved, certainly with this car over here, is we build a car that's perfect for you. We've put you back in time. We've allowed you to understand what it is that you like about a vehicle, what it is that you want in a vehicle, and we've given you this iconic vehicle that suits you perfectly. And it is not over the top on anything. It is in fact an exercise in balance. And that exercise in balance is extremely hard. So, I guess, and this is where the interesting terminology comes in, what do we max down on? What's the thing that we push hardest on? Can you push hard on balance? It seems like such a, like a counterintuitive thing to say, but that's what we do. Our proposition is one of balance. We'll build you a car that is the perfect balance for you. And to that point, that there is a very good example, in our opinion, of a car that does exactly that. Thank you.